Goeiedag. Good day, fellow South Africans, from a very, very warm Brisbane. It's going to hit 40 degrees Celsius today. Yep, it's going to be hot. And the interview that follows is extremely hot, and I'll tell you why. You're going to meet Laurel. Laurel, who played a role in helping the first South African family get parole or go through the first stage of asylum in the US, and I'm sure they will have no problem getting permanent residency there now. They're in very, very good hands. And before we listen to that interview, I want to read to you what Peter wrote to me earlier, because this kind of ties in with what Laurel is saying, because when you get to America, you've got to look at work and opportunities and things like that. Now, Peter, as you know, is a guy who looks after the American time zone for migration for me. And Peter wrote, "Hello, Scott. The immigration lawyer Stephen Culbreth contacted me. He is a colleague of Laurel Scott, who you'll be meeting in a second. He wants to put the word out and will be specializing in South Africa. I suggested he do a live stream with you. His email is in the one I forwarded to you. Also, the same firm as Laurel, who is at, and I'll put Laurel's email down below this video so you can contact her direct. They have launched a GoFundMe campaign and will make a website for this. So I'll put the GoFundMe campaign website down below this video as well. And if you can contribute funds to that GoFundMe, please do, because that money will go to helping South Africans. The question of income generation is ultra important. In this regard, Johan and Isaac Niemann from Panama 500 can also help. Now, I am actually talking to both of them at the moment. We might be doing a live stream or an interview like I've just done here with Laurel. Panama 500, I'll tell you more about it. They've got a Facebook page, and they're offering an online business opportunity where you can actually build a market for yourself, but I'm not going to talk about it at this stage. Also, I'll contribute my knowledge as a consultant in setting up a new ideas business. As I said before, I wrote a course on this called the New Ideas Business Course and act as a consultant with this. I have received many inquiries from South Africa about what to do, and we discussed their business ideas. I also started the Study Methods International 45 years ago in South Africa, which now operates in China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. Many of our people are licensees and authorized to sell study methods as independent contractors. We teach people how to learn and study and are pioneers in this field. There could be an opening in many other countries where people want to be involved in this business. It is also something that you could put online, opening the doors to many people. Regarding X, now X is that precedent family who've got parole. They've gone through the asylum process and they're on their way to getting permanent residency, yes, in the US, with the help of people like Laurel. Okay. Regarding X, I've sent him several very positive accommodation leads, so he should soon get that fixed up. And if you're American, and I'm going to say this in just about every friggin' video related to migration, if you're American, you got a spare room, you got a spare flat somewhere, you got a granny flat attached to your house that you're not using, if you got rooms that you're not using, please contact Peter Dykes, okay? Because we need to put you on the register so that when South Africans come through, they've got a place to stay for the short term. We're not talking permanent. We're talking about while they actually just get settled, and then they can get work and move on. But it's like a temporary residence. So please don't hesitate to contact Peter. I'll put Peter's email down below this video. Good on you guys for being involved. And now let's go with the Jesus. It's been a long day. Let's go with the interview with Laurel. And she's a wonderful lady, as you'll soon see. And please remember to subscribe to be kept informed. Take care. Bye for now.
Hi, Laurel.
Hi.
Lovely to meet you. And for all my subscribers, and we hit over 22,000 today, which is very exciting.
Excellent. I just went over 1,000 today myself.
Fantastic. And
Mhm.
70% of my subscribers are from South Africa. So it's a huge market of people that are
Mhm.
very interested in looking at options. Now, um, it's a hugely exciting moment for me because you are the lawyer that had a role in helping the first South African family, and I'll call them X, gain asylum in the US. Even if that was just a supportive role, you basically got them over the line.
To clarify, they don't have asylum yet. They have parole. They've
Yeah.
been allowed to enter the country for the purpose of applying for asylum, but they do actually have a long road ahead of them.
Hmm.
However, right now they're here, they're in the US, they're safe.
So how long before they have to actually go through the next stage of the process?
It could be several months. At first, we thought that they had a hearing scheduled later this month, but I checked with the court and the government hasn't filed the papers with the court yet, so
Right.
they don't have a hearing this month. It hasn't been scheduled yet. It can be scheduled at any time. And then we'll probably actually be filing the asylum application by mail within the next few months. And then they may have their trial, their individual hearing,
Yeah.
hopefully within a year, but it may be a little longer. It depends on how backlogged that court is.
Okay. And in the meantime, as South Africa goes more and more backward, and it really helps the case, doesn't it?
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. Now, tell me, how long have you been involved in migration law? A little bit about your background.
Yes. Well, I've been an attorney for 16 years and I've done immigration the whole time.
Mm.
I primarily do what's called waivers of inadmissibility, and that is for people usually who are married to a US citizen, but there's something in their background that makes the government want to keep them out anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Usually a prior unlawful presence in the US, prior misrepresentation, prior
Yeah.
deportation,
Yeah.
criminal history. So I usually help people who've done that. So asylum isn't normally what I do, but every immigration lawyer knows something about asylum because when we study it in law school, there's this thing called a clinical, which is like an apprenticeship, and those are almost always very focused on asylum. So I've worked on asylum cases in the past.
Well, what Peter said to me, which is really telling for me, was that he watched your video and
Mm-hmm.
the explanation of how the process works, and he said, "Look, this lady's got her head screwed on so right, because when X came through
Mm-hmm.
the border in the south, they only had 3 days before they were actually allowed in." And he
Right.
said that they didn't have to pay a bond and they didn't have to wear anything that had a GPS or something like that attached to them. And they really said that you played a major role in that. So I'm not sure what it was, but you know,
Well,
that's
I
what they
I
said.
prepared them. I prepared them for what's called the credible fear interview,
Yeah,
and um, I did at one point volunteer at a family detention center down in Texas. I spent a week there, and all I did all day for a week was prepare women, because the family detention center was women and
yeah,
children. I just prepared them for credible fear interviews one after the
yeah,
other. I must have done 20 or 30 in that week, and I did accompany one to her credible fear interview.
yeah,
So I also talked to the women about what they had experienced at the border. So I got a lot of firsthand stories of what actually had happened to them.
mm,
And that was part of how I was able to prepare this family, because I knew what CBP was looking for and whether they would hand them over to ICE. Most of the people I had prepared when I volunteered at the family detention center had not been released by CBP the way this family had. They had been handed over from CBP to ICE.
right,
Just to give you an idea of these different agencies, CBP, those are the officials you would encounter at the border or at the airport.
hmm,
And then ICE handles deportations from the interior of the US. So for CBP, they just hold people for a couple of days. They don't hold people for extended periods of time.
hmm,
So they would hand somebody over to ICE if they
yeah,
weren't sure this case was going to be strong enough or not, and then ICE does a longer review. So they had passed sort of the initial review, with CBP because they were ready for the credible fear interview. They knew exactly what parts of their stories to emphasize, but mostly because their stories themselves were just so strong. The facts of the case were so strong.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, look, this is the sort of support and advice we need on the home ground there. Now, asylum seems a very hot topic at the moment in the United States, especially with Trump's wall.
Yeah,
Tell me about tell me about other ports where you can claim asylum, and what are the key considerations for a person taking this option and for their family in doing this?
Sure. Somebody can apply or ask to apply for asylum at any port of entry. That would be any airport, any seaport, any land port, any place where you would normally show your passport in order to get in.
Mm-hmm.
Any of those, you can go up to them and say, I want to apply for asylum. The place where you can't do it is the consulate. You can't go to the embassy or consulate. You can't do it there. And they'll tell you you can't do it there. So I've only ever had one client who sort of did it that way. She went to the consulate, said she wanted to apply for asylum. They said, you really can't do that here. But her case was so strong. It was an extraordinarily strong case. So they actually issued her a visitor's visa to come to the US to apply for asylum. They're not going to do that for millions of people in a country.
Yeah.
Her case was very unusual. That's really not what the visitor's visa is for. Mm-hmm. So generally speaking, you can't ask for a visitor's visa for the express purpose of coming to the US to apply for asylum. In terms of what they're looking for, when you do get the chance to have a credible fear interview, they want to see if you have a reasonable or a credible fear of returning to your home country.
Mm-hmm.
What are you afraid of? What do you think is going to happen?
Right.
They want to know that something in the past has happened that makes you think they're coming after you. So this is one of the differences between refugees and asylees. Refugees are just masses of people fleeing, a conflict.
Right.
Asylum is much more particular. It's not just they're after people like me, it's they're after me. There's some reason I have to think that I have been identified as somebody that they want. So in the case of this family, and they've given me permission to talk about some of their details, just so everybody knows, I am bound by the rules of confidentiality. Normally, I can't divulge any information about a case unless the client or potential client gives me permission. So they have given me permission to talk about their case. Government officials had come to their firm and taken an inventory of everything. So they've clearly been identified. They're clearly on a list. Government officials came to them by their address, by their name, wrote everything down. They've clearly been, identified. So that's some of the things that they're looking for asylum. They're also looking for, is it the government who's after you? Because if it's just a criminal element, that's not enough. It has to be the government. For South Africans, I think that's going to be easy. That's one of the challenges a lot of the people from Central America face, is they're being targeted by gangs.
Yeah.
The gangs aren't the government.
Right.
And another thing for asylum is the persecution that you're experiencing has to be because of your membership in a protected social group. And generally that's race, religion, country of origin, political views, maybe your sexual orientation, something along those lines that makes you different from maybe the majority of the people in your country. Again, South Africans are going to have an easy time with this. They're being targeted because of their race. So being the membership of a protected social group, again, easy. And again, the people from Central America, that's another hard one that they're having, is why are they being targeted? What's their social group? What's their protected social group? So I think that the asylum cases for the white South Africans is actually, generally speaking, going to be a lot stronger than for the Central Americans. And most of the current asylum applicants within the United States are Chinese and Central Americans. Those are the huge groups of people applying for asylum in the US. So this would be a different group, but I actually think that a lot of the South African cases are stronger than those. And I have heard a lot of people in the comments for some of my videos say they don't give asylum to white people. Yes, they do. And in fact, when there was the conflict in Bosnia not too long ago, we had a lot of asylees from
Right.
Bosnia. So that's a myth. Throw that myth out the window. They absolutely you don't have to be non-white in order to get asylum. Not at all.
Okay. Now, just talking about the government's role in all this, there are
Uh-huh.
two issues I want to raise with you to see whether they would be factors that the government in the US would consider. The
Okay.
first is BEE, which is Black uh, empowerment, or Black equality empowerment. And basically, it means that if you're white, you've got no chance of getting a job. And that's
Mm-hmm.
a government thing. And the second one is the expropriation of land without compensation. Now, if people are impacted by either or both of those, will they have a better chance of getting into the US on asylum?
It's going to be part of the picture, but really what they're looking for is a threat of violence or a threat of arrest.
Mhm.
Now, one of the things that happened with this family was they were threatened with arrest if they sold any of their property. It was either expressed or implied because they
Right.
did the inventory and they were told that everything had to be there that was in the inventory at the time that the farm was actually seized, and that's a threat of arrest or possibly violence.
Right.
So discrimination is part of the whole story. It shows government involvement, but they are looking for something in addition to discrimination. Some
So they're
sort of
looking at like where they're going to harm you.
yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so let's take a situation again with expropriation of land without compensation.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a bank loan on that property. And the banks
Mm-hmm.
have said that if they expropriate your land without compensation, tough. That the banks have said you're still going to have to pay us some money, even though you no longer own the land. Now, I mean, the impact of that on a family financially is
Right.
huge.
I think for a lot of this, where farms are being taken away or businesses that are not farms being taken away, is there's that because it's so extreme, even though that in itself might not be viewed as violent, there's the question of what happens if you refuse.
Yeah,
What happens
exactly.
if you say, no, you can't take everything I own and leave me with nothing. And so
So if
that
they try and defend themselves on their farm, basically,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
So that could be a consideration by the
Right.
authorities. Okay, well that's
And
very
there's also the violence doesn't have to have actually occurred. It just has
yeah
to be a
implied.
credible, implied or a credible fear that it will
Yeah.
occur.
Okay.
Like you can't, yeah, it has to be like a reasonable person would have to think that they're in serious danger if they were
Yeah.
in similar circumstances. And for some of this, I know that there are individuals who have been committing acts of violence that the government is saying is not associated with them, but a lot of people think that they are. When you're looking at the government involvement aspect of the asylum, it's not only government direct involvement, but also things that the government allows,
Mm.
even though it's not them, they're turning the blind eye on purpose. They know it's happening and they just
Yeah.
decline to stop it. Like if you're being beaten up by somebody and the policeman just stands right there, right next to you and does
Yeah.
nothing,
Well,
then even though it's not the policeman doing it, he's
yeah.
acquiescing, he's allowing it.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
Julius Malema from the EFF, AfriForum actually said that he is promoting farm murders, and basically talking about the murders of minorities like whites in South Africa.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he said in a response in a tweet, maybe, maybe not. Now, he is the political leader of a major party in South Africa. Now, surely that in itself is suggesting that, they don't care and they're actually advocating that their group go out and harass or murder white South Africans.
It's certainly what I would argue in court. Yeah. I'm not going to say that that's a slam dunk,
Yeah.
that for sure that will get your case approved, but it's pretty strong.
Mm. Okay, because I can send you the links where you can
Yes.
have a look at this information,
Yes.
but it's all there on the record, and it's a tweet that Malema put out,
Mm-hmm.
and he's the one who said, "I'm not advocating for murdering whites, not just yet."
Right.
And he is wanting to become the president of South Africa, which is
Right.
hugely significant. Okay,
It's also significant that when he said that, There's a YouTuber called Philip DeFranco.
Yeah.
He does the DeFranco show,
Yeah.
and that was on there. And Philip DeFranco, he's alternative media. Like, this isn't, I think, being covered nearly enough in the mainstream media, but Phil DeFranco has a huge following, and he's as big as a lot of mainstream media, and he covered that, and he thought that that was very significant. So
well, I've actually got that same video on my channel. I can send you the link,
good.
so you can have a look at that.
Okay.
Okay, you played a major role in the last week in helping X gain asylum into the US. What is
gain entry? Entry.
Yeah, gain entry. What is their next step? I mean, what happens from here to the point where they get to permanent residency? What is the process they have to go through?
Okay, well, the first thing we're going to be doing is applying for employment authorization. They're allowed to apply right away because they did things the right way. They didn't come in illegally. They went to a point of inspection and did their credible fear interview and were allowed in. They were paroled in under D5. So that allows them to apply for employment authorization immediately. Whereas if they had entered illegally and then applied for asylum, they have to wait 180 days. Well, they wait for 150 days before they can file the papers, but there's like a 6-month waiting period before they can really get employment authorization. So with this family, we'll be able to apply right away. Unfortunately, it can take 5 months for that to be approved. So even though we can file now, it may be several months. And I'm going to request an expedite, but you know, sometimes they grant these expedites and sometimes they don't. Even if we get an expedite, you're looking at a month. So that's why we're doing the GoFundMe, because they need some money. They don't want to break the law. They don't want to work illegally. They're an honest family. They want to do everything right, but they have no money. And somebody is helping them right now. They're staying with a friend, but this is a big burden on that person. This is not a wealthy person they're staying with. So if anybody could give money in that GoFundMe, there's a link down below, and you know, please get.
Yeah, I'll put the link down below. And
so okay. Yeah. So they'll apply for the employment authorization.
Yeah.
And then we think they thought they had that hearing, but we think now that might just be a reporting date with ICE. So I think they have to report with ICE, and I'll be checking on. I already checked with the court, and they don't have a hearing, but they might have been mistaken, and it might be a reporting requirement with ICE. So I'm going to check with ICE and see if they have to report. And then after that, they'll be scheduled for a master calendar hearing, hopefully in the next few months. That's like a preliminary hearing. And at that first master calendar, what we would do is basically plead to the charges. And the charges are, you're not a US citizen, you don't have any kind of visa, and you really don't have any right to be here except that we paroled you in. And then we basically answer to that and we say, that's correct. You know, they don't have visas, they're not US citizens. And then the judge would say, what type of relief are you asking for? And we say, we want to ask for asylum.
Yeah.
And then what'll probably happen is we'll be scheduled for a second preliminary hearing. And in that second preliminary hearing, and it depends on how the judge wants to do it, so this may vary. At that second hearing, we would actually hand in the asylum application with all the affidavits and any evidence that we may have, and any list of witnesses that we may want to call. So all of that filing would be handed in, but it's also another preliminary hearing. It lasts 5 minutes. And then, but it takes months to get, like you have to wait like several months for that hearing, and then the hearing is 5 minutes.
Okay.
And then after that, they'll be scheduled for an individual hearing, which is the trial. And it may take a year to get that. I don't know. It depends on how backlogged that court is. And then at the individual hearing, that's when each of them is going to get up on the stand. They'll tell their story. In any asylum case, the most important thing is always the testimony, because they know when people flee their country, they often flee with the clothes on their backs. They don't take the time to gather evidence because they're scared for their lives.
Yeah.
And so that's very typical in an asylum case. So it'll be the judge, and there's no jury, it's just the judge.
Yeah.
And the judge will be deciding whether this person is credible or not. And I got to tell you, you know, speaking as an immigration attorney, you get lied to so often that you develop a pretty good radar for when people are lying.
Yeah.
And it's funny, it's just little inconsistencies and it's little, you know, facial expressions, but you start to pick up on it when you're looking for that frequently. And the judges are pretty good. They're pretty good at knowing when people are lying. So for a lot of South Africans, I think you're wondering, is my testimony going to be enough? if it's true, then probably. And I know, I'm really blown away by the honesty. This is just something I'm not used to doing what I do. Blown away by the honesty of a lot of the South Africans in their comments saying, I don't want to do anything the least bit wrong. I want to do everything by the book. I don't want to commit. I don't want to lie for half a second.
I can answer why that's happening is because they are deeply religious people,
Yes,
very, very Christian, and, you know, lying is not in their psyche. You know, if they're wanting to leave South Africa and come to America, it's because they really fear for their lives.
Right, right.
And
That's going to come. Go ahead.
I have so many people who say to me, you know, we feel like it's like one of the other families that I know who's basically said that she's just waiting to die because, you know, she's got no money. She's old. Well, she's not old as old like me. I'm an old guy. But she's older. And, you know, she just feels like there's no chance. She's just going to have to cop it when they come knocking at her door, which is very sad.
I'll tell you what, though, if she does manage to get on the plane and come, they're not going to detain her. They wouldn't detain an elderly person. She would be let out pretty quickly. Even though she's not coming with children, she would have a very good chance of them releasing her very quickly.
Now, that's a very important point you just raised, because most South Africans who are stuck in South Africa who want to get out either don't have the money, they're elderly, or they've got health issues. Now, if you're seeking asylum, how does that impact your case?
It won't, except that you won't be detained. It doesn't affect how likely they are to believe you. You know, they would believe a young person as easily as they would believe an elderly person. Maybe it adds a little bit of credibility to the case because you're obviously not a migrant worker. You're not an economic migrant if you're elderly. So that may actually come into play and increase your chances slightly.
Okay, so what you're saying in effect is this group of people who using a traditional visa because of their age and their health and things like that, they would never have a chance. If they have a serious case and they seek asylum, they've probably got a good chance.
Yeah. If you have a real asylum case that hits all of the points that I described, most of the people applying for asylum right now it's probably more than half are actually economic migrants.
Right.
And that's why we have this big flood. But also there is this conflict going on in Central America, as I described. And this is what's flooding the system. And that's why it's become such an issue, is a lot of the people in Central America are genuinely fleeing violence. And I've heard their stories, and it's bad. I mean, is it as bad as South Africa? It's close. It's different, but it's pretty bad. But their cases might not meet the criteria for asylum because it's not always the government and they're not a member of a protected social group.
Whereas in South Africa, it is the government who are playing a major role.
It is the government and you are a protected social group. But because a lot of them came, it started, and they believe they have an asylum claim. They're not lying about their cases. But because they began flooding the system, then the system gets backlogged. And when it gets backlogged, people know that they can come in and then their cases might not be scheduled for a long time. So it becomes an easy way for them to come in. But one of the things the government did when they started getting flooded, because usually there's about maybe 60,000 cases a year.
Wow.
Suddenly there were like 300,000 in 1 year.
Wow.
And now it's ballooned to 700,000. So it's a backlog, of 10 years.
Yeah.
But what they did when that happened, in order to prevent new people from coming in to exploit that backlog, was it's now last in, first out. So the people just arriving are first on the list to have their cases reviewed. So the people who applied, 2 years ago and they got in this huge backlog, their cases aren't going to be heard for, 8 or 9 years.
Right.
But newly arrived people are going to be heard maybe within a year. And that is to prevent the flood from continuing so that people aren't, new people.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Now, if in the asylum process, how does marrying a U.S. citizen help you?
It doesn't help you get asylum. But what it does is it gives you the opportunity. Let's say your asylum case isn't going well.
Right.
Maybe you weren't able to prove that it's the government after you. Maybe you weren't able to prove that, you could experience arrest or violence. But you've married a citizen, so then what we do is we withdraw the asylum case, and then you adjust status based on marriage.
Okay, so once you married a U.S. citizen, you automatically have residency.
It's not automatic. If you entered lawfully, you didn't sneak across the border, you didn't enter without inspection. If you entered lawfully, then you can apply to adjust status. And there is a process, but it's mostly formalities. If somebody entered without inspection, and I know no South Africans are going to do this, but if somebody entered without inspection, then they hire me because then they have all these immigration violations and we have to apply for a waiver.
So the thing is, do it the right way.
Exactly,
now,
do it the right way.
That actually raises a very important issue for me. What are the legal issues associated with getting a holiday visa to the US and then claiming asylum on arrival in the US?
Okay. So there's going to be two circumstances with this. There's going to be people who already have one, and there's going to be people who don't have one yet and are thinking about applying for a visitor's visa. So if somebody already has the visitor's visa, like when they got it, they were planning on coming for a visit.
Yeah.
But now they're thinking, okay, well, I have this visa. Now I want to go apply for asylum. It's perfectly legal. Everything's fine to use that to get on the plane.
Right.
Which is the hardest part of this whole thing, because the airline wants to see and the reason the airline wants to see that you have the document is because if you get deported at the airport, the airline has to pay for your trip back.
Right.
So that's why the airlines want to check and make sure. So as long as you've got that visitor's visa, you can get on the plane. And then as soon as you get to the airport, you say, I want to apply for asylum. And the reason you do it that way is because they're going to ask the purpose of your visit. If you say, I'm just here for a visit, and when you're actually planning to stay, you're planning to stay forever, then you just lied. And that's technically fraud. Now, if they let you through, if you do lie and they let you through, it's actually not held against you when you apply for asylum. Like, it's not because you're applying for asylum, they sort of forgive that. But it's still, I can't tell people, oh, it's okay, just do it that way, because then I'm telling people to commit fraud and I could lose my license.
Yeah. Okay.
So, what you're supposed to do if you're coming with the visitor's visa is as soon as you get to that immigration officer, you're supposed to say, I want to apply for asylum. And then you'll get taken off to secondary and they'll talk to you for a little bit and then probably take you to a detention facility where maybe you'll stay for a few days and be released, or maybe you'll be handed over to ICE.
Right.
Now, the other situation is people who don't have that visitor's visa yet, and they want to get one so they can get on they want to do everything right. They're just going to use it to get on the plane. They're going to come and they're going to apply at the airport. Here's the problem. When you apply for the visitor's visa with the consulate, you have to say what the purpose of your visit is. It's almost, like being at the airport. And if you say, I'm just coming for a short visit, like if you say, I want to come so I can apply for asylum, they're going to deny it. Because that's not the purpose of the visitor's visa.
Right.
So
it's a technical area, and that's something that people can speak to you about. But
right.
Basically, if you do it right with a visitor's visa, you can get in. Is what you're saying?
Yes. Okay. But you pretty much already have to have it before you decide that you want to do it.
Absolutely.
So what the other family did was they got the visitor's visa to go to Mexico. They got a Mexican visitor's visa. And I think that's fine because you're not staying in Mexico.
Yeah.
And then they went to the border. The only downside with that is you are going to be stuck in that transition camp for a couple of weeks. And also, I don't know how much longer those transition camps are going to be there. This is a rapidly changing situation.
Absolutely. Okay. What are the most important considerations when seeking asylum? I mean, what are the things that really need to be, you have to have altered down?
I I would say just tell the truth. It's when people start embellishing that they get into trouble.
Right.
When they have a pretty good story and they decide that it's not good enough. So they begin with a story that's true and then they add to it, embellish. That's when people kill a perfectly good case, because they catch people in a lie, embellishing, and they don't believe any of it. So don't embellish. I would say absolutely speak to an attorney, somebody who has experience with asylum, just to develop your story. And it's not about, creating new information. It's about
all the facts out.
following the story out and determining what's important, because you're only going to have an officer's attention for a few minutes. You want to spend those few minutes talking about the things that are going to get your case approved.
Right.
You don't want to start talking about things that are irrelevant. And that's what an attorney can help you with. What's irrelevant? What's irrelevant?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, can the U.S. government
Sorry,
contact...
one more thing.
Sorry.
If you haven't left yet, it would be great if you could do a consultation with an attorney before you leave, so that the attorney can advise you on what kind of evidence, if you have the time, if you've got maybe a couple of days, the attorney can say, get the following documents before you go. Maybe it's medical evidence, maybe it's, a notice from the government, but the attorney can say,
or a crime case or something like that.
I'm sorry?
A crime case number or something like that.
Yes, exactly.
Now, just on that issue, can the U.S. government officials contact South African authorities to confirm an asylum claim?
Can U.S. government officials contact the
South African government authorities, because I believe in places like Australia and New Zealand, one of the big things about asylum is that if you're seeking asylum, the government in the country you're seeking asylum cannot have any contact with the country you came from.
They may contact the South African government to see if there's a criminal record. But they're not going to start verifying the facts of the... I have seen times where they verified some facts, but it wasn't with the government. Like I remember once I saw a denial, and it wasn't a case that it wasn't an asylum case I'd worked on. I was doing a waiver later on. And she had claimed that the government had killed her father.
Yeah.
And the U.S. government said, no, actually your father died in a work accident, in an industrial accident. So they had gone and done some research in her country, but I don't know that they contacted the government. They may have contacted places where he used to work, or even searched public
seen
records.
Something on the internet.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
But they are aware that when people are applying for asylum, quite often there's still family back in the home country.
Yeah.
And they don't want to do anything that might threaten the safety of family that's been living.
Yeah.
So they are careful about that.
Yeah. Now, at what point in the collapse of South Africa do you think asylum will just be a formality by the US to citizens fleeing the country?
That's not really the way it would be done. It wouldn't be done by asylum. It would be refugees.
Refugee status then, yeah.
Yes. Refugee and asylee are different in the United States.
Let's look at the refugee side then.
Okay, so refugees are you have to apply for refugee status from outside of the country.
Right.
You basically apply with the United Nations High Commission on Refugees, UNHCR. Right. And then UNHCR designates you as a refugee, and you have to be fleeing your country. So the downside of applying to be a refugee is everything's done while you're outside of the country, usually in a second country. So usually this would be people who have already fled South Africa and now in another place like Zimbabwe.
Namibia or Zimbabwe.
Namibia, something like that.
Yeah.
And then it can take a couple of years after you're designated a refugee by UNHCR before a first world country agrees to take you.
Right. So asylum is a much better way to go.
Yes, it's different because the refugees don't have to prove that the government is after them in particular.
Yeah.
They just have to prove that there's something going on in their country, and masses of people are fleeing. Okay. But also with refugees, the U.S. will designate, how many they're going to take in a year. There's a cap, whereas there's no
Right.
cap for asylum. There's a cap, and then there's a cap per region. So
Right.
they'll say, well, we'll take 30,000 from Africa, we'll take 30,000 from Central America, we'll take 30,000 from Asia. So there's those caps there, and I think that cap is coming down. So
I know in Australia it is.
Yeah, usually it's around 80,000 a year for the U.S. Usually it's around 80,000 a year, and right now it's set at about 50,000, and that's because we just have so many asylees. Because usually we only get about 30 or 40,000 are approved for asylum per year. I said 60,000 apply, but 30 or 40,000 are approved.
Right.
So because we have this massive influx, the president has brought down the number of refugees.
Right. What is the role of the sponsor or the person who's going to provide you with accommodation and stuff like that? I mean, is that a critical role of an application?
It's only important for getting out of detention.
Okay.
It's not important for whether your case will be approved or denied.
So it's preferable if you have a sponsor who can offer you accommodation once
Right.
they say, yeah, you can stay here while we sort you out.
Exactly. Otherwise, they might say, if you're in detention, well, we can't let you go. Where are you going to go? Well, you're going to be on the streets. We're not going to let you go just sleep on the streets. You have to have a place where you're going. But it doesn't have anything to do with the merits of the case.
Okay. Because one of the things that we're trying to do with Peter, and I'm promoting this left, right, and center, is any American who's got spare rooms, a granny flat, a flat somewhere else, or something that you can temporarily let South Africans move into for a short term while they get established, just to contact Peter so that they can become like the sponsor, so they're not caught in detention.
Right. If nonprofits want to coordinate that, I think that's great. I think that's something that I really don't know that I can be a part of because I don't have the resources to check and make sure that the place you're going to is going to be safe. So I would say everybody be careful with that. There's a lot of really good people who want to open their homes, and there's people who aren't so good. So just, be careful with that, eyes open. But, you got to do what you got to do. This is a desperate situation.
Yeah. Well, Peter's very, very good at assessing people. He's been helping me now for many months. Okay. Talking about Peter, are you able to help Peter to get more American families to offer short-term accommodation? Okay, I've just covered that. Sorry, I just read that. Okay, well,
and I emailed him and he emailed me back. We've only just sort of been introduced on the internet,
okay. Collaboration between like-minded parties seems to be the key to helping South African minorities, individuals, and families escape the madness. How can my subscribers help you and your legal firm? I mean, I know about the GoFundMe, and they can put money in there. Is there anything else they can do?
Hopefully in the future, Stephen Colberth and I are working on this. We're working in a collaboration. Stephen is, I don't think we talked about him before we got on, but I don't think we talked about him since we went live. Stephen Colberth is another attorney. He's a colleague of mine, and he and I have been talking about putting something together that would be more comprehensive. So not only assisting people after they've already arrived, but maybe trying to help them move assets to another country lawfully, and maybe go to a stopover country if you need to leave right away, and at least get safe while you try to figure out what to do next. So he and I are working on something comprehensive for people. But for now, until we know exactly what we're going to do, we're not in a position yet to be taking funds, although I do appreciate that. Watch for that in the future, and we may have something put together. We're working as quickly as we can on this. Now that we see that a family has gotten across, I think that was a lot of people didn't think. It was a precedent. Yes, it was a. I mean, I knew it was possible, but I think a lot of people didn't think it was possible. So it's a precedent in sort of a psychological barrier that people have had, because they were thinking this isn't going to happen, and now they're thinking maybe it's going to happen. Well, so I think that's what's changed.
I know in Canada they're making it very, very hard for white South Africans to migrate there, and a couple have been sent back, and that's where the big negative has been. you know, that they would rather take Muslims than they would take white South Africans, which is
Yeah.
quite incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, so in conclusion, I know you'll find working with Peter an amazing part of this effort. Any message you'd like to send him?
I look forward to working with him. I've now heard a lot about him. I hadn't heard a lot about him before. So I'll be emailing him back and forth. And yeah, I look forward to a good working relationship there.
Fantastic. And I have a question I'd like to ask you for from my channel. You've got a YouTube channel. You put videos up there. Would you like to share those with me so I can put them up on my channel and then promote what you're doing?
Sure. Only a fraction of my videos are specifically about South Africa.
Yeah, I'm talking about South African related.
Yes, yes, absolutely, please.
Yeah, fantastic. I'll do that. What I'll do is with all those, I'll put the GoFundMe, I'll put your email contacts. Can you ask Steve to send me an email he would be happy with me to put on the YouTube channel?
Sure, yes.
And so that people can contact either of you.
Okay, yes.
Now, do you have a website?
It's not set up yet to accept asylum cases because I have intake sheets that are online, and I think Stephen and I may create a new one. So at least for now, I'm not going to send people to my professional website because it's just not set up for asylum cases.
Right.
But be watching for that from Stephen and me in the near future.
Yeah. Well, look, I look forward to chatting to you and Stephen in the future. And let's really get this happening, because there are a lot of people in South Africa who are desperate to escape where they are at. And I mean a lot of people. And this case with X has really, given them new hope. It really has.
Good.
So thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
And it's lovely to meet you. And we'll be chatting a lot by email and so on. And what I'll do is in the near future, if you've got the time, we'll have a bit of a live stream with the group, because I've got an extended group on the live stream that like to ask questions and things like that. So there might be things I've missed that they want to talk about.
All right, sounds good.
All righty. Lovely meeting you.
Good meeting you too.
And I'm just going to save this, and I will send you the link where I put this up. So if you want to put this up on your YouTube channel, please.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Okay, take care. Lovely to meet you, Laurel.
Yes, thanks.
Bye for now.